Today, we're going to have a lecture, as the agenda says, on water and energy relationship. Those of you that have been involved in this field for as long as I know some of you have been, you recognize the importance of the interaction between the water and energy. And our speakers today have lots and years of experience on addressing the issues of water and energy. So they'll talk about what they're doing, what the practical approaches that they've taken on are, and what their vision is for going forward. With me today, as our distinguished panel members are, Ed Archuleta, President, Chief Executive Officer of El Paso Water Utility. Ed has been manager of El Paso Water Utilities Public Service Board since January of 1989. He's responsible for all aspects of water, wastewater, reclaimed water service, and stormwater to the greater El Paso metropolitan area. As was mentioned today, I'm proud to say he is an alum of New Mexico State University. Ed?
Good morning. I think what I'll do is stand, since I have to use the remote anyway. I want to thank the Paso Norte group and NMSU and UTEP for inviting me here today to speak to you on the water energy nexus. It's a topic that's very familiar for me, and with our utility. We've been dealing with this issue for several years. As a matter of fact, it was about 4 years ago I hired our first energy manager at the utility to develop an energy policy, and some of the things I'll be talking to you about will be related to those policy implementation. First of all, I think most of you are familiar with the water energy nexus. In the United States, agriculture uses the most amount of water in this country, followed by the power, the energy side, the energy side of it. We don't have a lot of hydroelectric power, but some of you probably know that Elephant Butte Dam Caballo does produce some hydropower, but it takes a lot of energy to produce electricity, and it takes a lot of energy to produce water, and I think the cycle is pretty well known to all of you. Basically, we're a big user of power in this area, particularly electricity. We also have natural gas that we use, but about 90% of our energy is used in processing water or wastewater. We actually have water, wastewater, reclaimed water, and stormwater as part of our responsibilities. We're a component part of the city of El Paso, but we're managed by a separate board called the Public Service Board, and I report to the Public Service Board. You can see that we are the largest customer of El Paso Electric. We used enough energy last year to power about 30,000 homes. So I thought I'd put it in that kind of form so you can kind of identify with how much energy that is. There's probably a couple 100,000 homes here, not quite that many, but in the region. We serve about 750,000 people in the greater El Paso area. And last year we spent about $15 million on energy. Matter of fact, I can tell you in our cost centers that we focus on how we can be more efficient, more effective, and produce the product that we do at the least cost to our customers. Is we focus on energy, on people, and on chemicals. Those are our three largest cost centers that require careful analysis and consideration. We actually have 8 water and wastewater facilities in this city. We have 3 wastewater treatment plants. You can see them in color, and when we have a reclamation plant that treats wastewater to drinking water standards. It's one of the few in the United States that actually converts wastewater to a drinking water supply. We inject it into the aquifer, what's called aquifer storage and recovery. We also have 4 water treatment plants. We have 2 water plants that take water from the river and treat it. We have an Upper Valley water treatment plant that takes arsenic in this region. Arsenic is a naturally occurring substance, and we move the arsenic from about 30 wells in the Upper Valley and then put it to beneficial use. And then we have the K. Bailey Hutchison desalination plant that was discussed this morning. It's the largest inland desalination plant in the world. It treats brackish groundwater, and there's plenty of brackish groundwater in this region. So we decided a few years ago that we would partner with Fort Bliss. The facility is actually located on Fort Bliss property. We own it, operate it, maintain it, sell water to Fort Bliss, as well as to the El Paso community by removing the salty water. So we also have a lot of wells. We are a city that uses conjunctive use, meaning we're using surface water from the river along with groundwater. We have 171 wells. We have 75 lift stations that pump the wastewater, to the treatment plants, particularly in the valley area where it's flat. And then we have a lot of booster stations where we boost the pressure. So just to give you an idea of where we use our energy. In the wells, because our wells are deep, our wells are 800, 1,000, 1,200 feet deep. Obviously, it takes a lot of energy to lift that water into the system. Let me talk a little bit more about water management. We spend a lot of time on planning. We do a lot of diversification of our resources. As I mentioned, we have a very strong conservation program here in El Paso that's been very successful, and I'll talk about that. And then we have a growing demand for reclaimed water systems. Just like in other parts of the country, you're going to see more and more systems, utilities, cities using reclaimed water, which is basically wastewater that's been treated to an acceptable standard, not necessarily potable, but can be used for irrigation, turf, industrial cooling, etc. These are the diversified resources. We practice total water management, like I said, starting with a strong conservation program. We use reclaimed water in cemeteries, golf courses, parks, cooling water at the power plant, apartment complexes that have a lot of turf and what have you. The groundwater, we have two different aquifers on both sides of the mountain, the Waco and the Mesilla Bolsons. And then we have the surface water from the river, and then the desalination. And then as an insurance policy, we own about 75,000 acres of land east of El Paso that one day we may have to import water into El Paso depending upon the growth of the community. And it's there as a holding place because in Texas you have to have the ownership of the surface in order to have a right of capture. So we've done that to ensure long-term water supply. This kind of gives you a pictorial. I think on the left it starts back in the mid-60s or so to the current time, but you can see how we've, I think this, yeah, oops, go back. You can see starting with the groundwater and from the two aquifers and then the surface water, how we were growing and how when we started our water conservation program back in 1991, 20 years ago, how we've dropped off in the use of the water from the Waco Bolson, which was one of our primary objectives to stabilize the aquifer. That aquifer was dropping 1.5 to 3 feet per year, and it was obviously not sustainable, so you can see what we've done there. In exchange for that, we've basically taken surface water, and you can see how we really expanded it over a period of time by obtaining water rights, purchase and or leases of water rights from the river. And then the Mesilla is the west side of El Paso. The west side of El Paso uses water from the Mesilla, and it's been fairly stable, as you can see, despite the growth. But it kind of shows you how, if you go to this point and go back, that we're using about the same amount of water as we were 20 years ago, and we've grown about 250,000 people in population. So that's the results of conservation and using reclaimed water to offset your potable water needs. All right, the water conservation program, just to kind of give you a flavor for it, because if you conserve water, you also conserve energy. Whether you have low flow shower heads and low flow fixtures. The toilets that now are 1.6 gallons compared to the big ones they used to have 4.5, 5, 7 gallons per flush. We no longer have those, as you know, so you save water, you save energy. We have a tiered water rate structure which encourages water conservation. We've offered a number of rebates and incentives. With El Paso Electric, we've been successful in converting from swamp coolers to refrigerated air. A lot of the new homes going in now use refrigerated air. It does take a lot less energy to cool a turbine than to scatter swamp coolers all over the city. You know, that was the paradigm back then, as everybody had a swamp cooler. It takes a lot less water to cool it centrally in a power plant than to cool individual homes and businesses. So we've changed that paradigm, and it's moving forward, you know, toward that basis. And a lot of power plants, even the Palo Verde plant in Phoenix, uses reclaimed water from the 91st Avenue wastewater treatment plant in Phoenix, Arizona. So it makes more sense to cool the water and to provide refrigerated air as opposed to using separate swamp coolers. We do have a lot of others from anything from replacing the toilets, going to the horizontal washing machine. Those of you that have those machines, the front-loading washing machines, they use a lot less water. They use a lot less energy as well. So we've had rebate programs on those as well. And of course, education. If you've never visited our desalination plant, come out, because you'll see a big education center there called Tech H2O. We also have a facility at the zoo called Discovery El Paso. It's a facility mostly for kindergarten children. The Tech H2O is for all ages, so it gives you bilingual interpretation of water in the Chihuahuan Desert and how to best manage it. This kind of shows you in terms of power. You can see the growth, and I mentioned about $15 million per year. Obviously, the desalination plant uses more energy, so we had to budget for more power. But you can see that in the past 20 years, we figured we've saved about 291 billion gallons of water. You can see enough to fill the Sun Bowl about 7,000 times. So give you some idea how much water that is. We avoided the generation of about almost 1 billion kilowatt hours of electricity by doing that, and avoided pumping more than 277 million gallons of water to produce that electricity. So a lot of times people go into conservation programs not realizing, you know, the beneficial effects that it really can have, not just on the water side, but on the energy side, whether it's done by the utility or whether it's done by you as a consumer in your home or in your business. This is our per capita consumption that I talked about. We did it by strategic planning. We did it by setting goals. We did it by having advisory committees. Back in 1990, we were using over 200 million gallons per day, 200 gallons per person per day. We set a goal to 160. You can see that we met that goal. We set a goal in 2000 to go to 140 by 2010, and we met that goal. Now we want to stay at about 130 going forward. Now, it's probably going to be less than that, to be frank with you, because all new construction is going in with xeriscaping. You know, you don't see a lot of turf. The turf that you see, you cannot landscape a home in El Paso with more than 50% of the landscapable area with turf. We're encouraging xeriscaping, basically desertscaping, if you will, to include the proper use of trees, shrubs, and grasses that basically use less water, you know, and basically are indigenous to this particular area. We live in the Chihuahuan Desert. You have to behave like you live in the Chihuahuan Desert. And it's been a huge education effort, but we're making a lot of progress. This is our, you know, one thing we're really proud of is this Hueco Bolson, which is the aquifer on the east side of the Franklin Mountains. It starts in New Mexico. It's part of El Paso on the east side and then into Mexico. It's a primary source of water for Juarez, Mexico. They now are using water also from the Masilla. They started doing that about 2 years ago, pumping water from an area called Conejos Médanos, which is west of Ciudad Juarez. But traditionally, it's been the sole source of water for Ciudad Juarez and the major supply for us. But you can see, based on our strategy, how we've cut our withdrawals in about half to what they were 20 years ago because of the programs I described. And that saves water, it saves energy.